Mark Parker pulled into the Redwood rest stop, a quiet haven along a desolate highway, without knowing that his brief pause for a cup of coffee would turn into an encounter with something far more unsettling. A former Marine with many years of experience handling extreme situations, Mark never expected that today he would witness an alarming scene, a little black girl around 8 years old, seated with an older white man. Almost instantly, his instincts screamed that something was off. In a world where things are not always what they appear to be, Mark wondered what hidden danger might lie beneath this apparently normal moment. Before the story unfolds, feel free to share where you are watching from, and if you enjoy this dramatic account, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Mark Parker, who once faced life and death challenges in his military career, was on a long drive seeking a quiet spot to rest. The Redwood Highway stretched endlessly under the late afternoon sun when he decided to stop at this secluded rest area. It was a small, isolated spot with only a few parked cars, a simple break like so many he had taken before. Stepping out of his car, Mark took a deep breath and savored the cool, fresh air of the fading day. The sun was dipping behind distant mountains, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, a stark contrast to the harsh, tense memories of his past military operations. Today, everything felt peaceful and relaxed. He entered a modest diner, immediately embraced by the warm, inviting environment. The room was simple, furnished with a few tables, plastic chairs, and dated landscape paintings hanging on the walls. Soft music played from an old radio behind the counter, intermingled with the clatter of cups and utensils as a small number of customers enjoyed their meals. An elderly couple chatted quietly in one corner, while a couple of truck drivers sipped their coffee and exchanged remarks. It all seemed perfectly ordinary. Mark planned a quick stop just to get some coffee before hitting the road again, but as he neared the counter, an unusual sight in the far corner of the diner made him hesitate. By the window sat a middle-aged white man, probably in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and dressed smartly in a navy suit. He appeared calm and composed, idly flipping through a newspaper he clearly wasn't reading. Facing him was a little black girl in a light blue dress that caught the eye amid the quiet, subdued decor. She sat silently, her wide eyes full of worry as her small hands nervously fiddled with the hem of her dress. The odd pairing disturbed Mark instantly. Although the man exuded a neat and refined air, the furtive way he kept glancing at the girl hinted at an unsettling control that he tried to hide. Meanwhile, the child continuously shifted in her seat, glancing around with anxiety evident on her face and trembling hands that betrayed her nervousness, making Mark focus intently on every detail. He couldn't help but question what was happening. The significant age gap, their different backgrounds, and the tense atmosphere triggered his alarm bells. While the man might have been a relative or guardian, the situation also suggested a darker possibility that Mark, with his honed instincts, could not ignore. Ordering a hot black coffee, he stood near the counter, unable to tear his eyes away from the troubling scene. The girl's hands twisted together, and a vague fear filled her eyes, prompting a flurry of questions in his mind. Is she safe? Who is this man? Why does she seem so scared? As he sipped his coffee slowly, Mark maintained enough distance to observe without drawing attention. The overall stillness and silence in the diner belied the undercurrent of tension that kept his senses alert as he pondered whether this was simply a family on a road trip or if something far more sinister was unfolding. Standing by the vending machine for a better view, Mark noted the growing restlessness of the girl. Her legs swung awkwardly beneath the table, barely grazing the floor, and her hands continued nervously toying with the edge of her dress. Each time the man stole a furtive glance, she ducked her eyes quickly, almost as if she feared his look. What made matters worse was the overly controlled air the man projected. He appeared relaxed, casually flipping through his paper and sipping Coffee, yet every subtle movement revealed the constant monitoring of the girl. Even the smallest actions, like a slight stretch or the adjustment of her posture, prompted the man to flick a glance her way. Mark's unease grew, for it was not merely the differences in their appearances, but the unmistakable fear in the girl's demeanor and the man's deliberate behavior that deepened his suspicions. He found himself wondering if the man was indeed her guardian or if his intentions were far more malicious. Memories of battlefield caution surged back, and Mark realized that in his many years of service, his instincts had reliably warned him of hidden threats. Relying on more than just what met the eye, Mark noticed the unmistakable mix of fear and helplessness in the child's expression. It compelled him to act. Every slight move she made was laden with tension, her gaze darting around as if waiting for a rescue. Brief moments when her eyes met his only revealed a profound terror that he couldn't ignore any longer. His sense of duty, forged in the heat of combat, pushed him to decide that he must act, even if he wasn't entirely sure if he was overreacting. Had he seen a misunderstanding, a tired child on a long journey with a protective relative, or something far more dangerous? The combination of the girl's palpable fear, the man's stiff and controlled mannerisms, and the eerie silence around them left no doubt in Mark's mind. This was not a normal situation. Struggling with conflicting thoughts, Mark continued to quietly observe, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on him. Every instinct screamed that he had to do something fast before any further harm could come to the girl. He clutched his coffee cup, yet its warmth did nothing to relieve the tension building inside him. Resolutely, he decided to keep watching a little longer, determined to act at the first sign of any unusual movement. The seconds passed slowly, each one amplifying his anxiety, until a subtle gesture changed everything. The girl raised her hand. At first it seemed like an innocent motion, but then she turned her hand outward, her fingers splayed wide, a gesture that struck Mark like a flash from his past experiences in dangerous situations. This was not a random act, it was a silent distress signal. His heart pounded as he watched the girl, unable to discern whether it was merely a nervous habit or an urgent call for help. With a controlled effort, Mark tried to catch her eye in a way that wouldn't alert the man. In that brief connection, he saw in her eyes a desperate plea for help, an unspoken scream in her gaze. It was as if she was silently begging for someone to rescue her from this grim scenario. Realizing there was no time to waste, Mark knew that he had to plan his next step carefully. Confronting the man head-on without a solid plan could make matters worse, yet ignoring the plea was not an option. Surveying the diner, he noticed a few oblivious patrons scattered about, none of whom seemed to sense the danger. The quiet ambience of the afternoon only made him more anxious. Deep down, he silently wished that the authorities were already here, though he recognized it was not too late to act now. When the girl raised her hand once more and her eyes locked with his, Mark was certain it was a plea for rescue. Her hand trembled as she signaled in a manner he instantly recognized from his military days, small but powerful enough to indicate life or death. Without delay, Mark slipped his phone from his pocket and moved toward the door, never letting his gaze stray from the unsettling scene at the table. His fingers quickly dialed emergency services. In a low, urgent tone meant to avoid drawing attention, he explained, "Hello, I need to report an emergency. I'm at a rest stop on the Redwood Highway in a diner, and I'm witnessing what I believe to be a kidnapping. There is an 8-year-old black girl in a light blue dress, sitting with a middle-aged white man, and she's clearly signaling for help." He provided every detail he could muster, stressing the child's distress and the man's unnerving behavior. "I'm a former Marine," he added, hoping to bolster the credibility of his concern. "I truly believe the girl is in danger, and I cannot wait any longer." The operator responded professionally, assuring him that help was already on its way and advising him to remain calm and not engage with the man directly. Feeling a slight relief knowing that backup was coming, Mark turned back into the diner. He kept his eyes fixed on the table, unwilling to let go of the scene, even as every second felt like an eternity for the frightened girl. He knew that his decision had started an irreversible chain of events, and he steeled himself for whatever might come next. After ending the call, his anxiety did not lessen as the reality of the situation continued to weigh on him. He rejoined the diner, keeping a discreet distance while never taking his eyes off the pair. Once inside, the girl's behavior only strengthened his suspicions. She no longer scanned the room as much as before, but her small form seemed even more intense. Her hands clenched on the table and her gaze fixed blankly ahead, as if to avoid catching the man's attention. In contrast, the man maintained an air of calm as he slowly turned the pages of his newspaper, though every few moments he shot a cold, controlling look at the girl that made Mark even more alarmed. It wasn't the caring glance of a guardian. It was something far more disturbing, like the look of someone keeping a hostage under strict control. With time slipping away and his instincts sharpening to military precision, Mark was forced to make a choice: wait for the authorities to arrive or intervene immediately. He worried that confronting the man without the proper backup might spark a dangerous reaction that could hurt the girl. But every time he looked into her desperate eyes, his conscience would not allow him to simply stand by and do nothing. Taking a deep breath, he set his coffee cup down and slowly approached the table where the pair sat, carefully controlling every movement so as not to trigger any alarm. As he neared, the man glanced up, his expression shifting from indifferent to curious, with a weariness that seemed to betray his true nature. Mark mustered a friendly smile, masking his inattention, and greeted, "Good evening. Is everything all right here?" The man raised an eyebrow and returned a forced smile, replying, "Yes, everything is just fine. We are simply resting after a long trip." His tone was calm, yet a hint of tension lingered in his words. Mark paused, his eyes locking onto the little girl's face as he searched for a hint of reassurance. For a moment she stayed still, then quickly glanced towards the man, clearly trying hard to avoid drawing attention. Softly, Mark asked the girl, "Are you okay?" His gentle tone was meant to comfort her, even as the underlying tension in the conversation grew palpable. The man chuckled lightly, his smile cold and unconvincing as he interjected, "She's just tired, you know how kids." She's my niece." Mark didn't respond immediately. Instead, he crouched down to meet the girl at eye level, hoping his kind tone could ease her evident fear. "Are you all right?" he repeated softly. The girl hesitated. Her eyes flickered toward the man before, darting back to him, and in that instant Mark saw all the terror written on her face. Her lips trembled slightly, and with a stiff, forced nod, she acknowledged his quiet inquiry. Mark's heart sank as every subtle detail, the rigidity in her posture, the unyielding coldness of the man, and that unnatural nod, confirmed his worst fears. Realizing that pushing further might cause the man to retreat into an even more defensive state and potentially endanger the girl, Mark decided to stand back and act as if he was merely checking in. As he began to turn away, the man called out in a strangely cheerful tone, "Thanks for checking in. Have a good evening." Mark offered a slight nod, but made no move to return the greeting. He knew that addressing the man's false cordiality was the wrong moment, especially with the police on the way. Deep inside, however, he was braced to react instantly if the man made any abrupt moves. The safety of the girl was his utmost concern. Back near the counter, as Mark peered outside at the quiet parking lot, filled with only a few trucks and private cars, the dim twilight did nothing to ease his rising anxiety. Each minute felt unbearably Long while he anxiously awaited the arrival of the police, his mind raced through various scenarios. Acting too rashly might provoke the man to harm the girl, yet any sign that the man was preparing to leave might signal the most dangerous moment. Just then, Mark noticed the girl make another subtle gesture. This time, she raised her hand to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, but it wasn't just a casual motion. Her hand remained open, her fingers spread deliberately as if echoing the distress signal she'd given earlier. Convinced this was no coincidence, Mark swiftly dug into his jacket pocket and redialed the emergency services, this time with a more urgent tone. "Hello, I'm the caller from earlier about a suspicious situation at this Redwood Highway rest stop. I'm still here and the girl is clearly signaling for help. Please send someone immediately. This man might be dangerous." The dispatcher's calm instructions were clear. Remain vigilant, don't engage with the man, and that officers were on their way within approximately 5 minutes. Although those 5 minutes would feel like an eternity to Mark, knowing that help was coming did ease his mind slightly. The priority was to avoid tipping off the man that he was under close watch. Maintaining a discreet distance near the vending machines, Mark continued to monitor every minute movement of the pair. He was aware that if the man suspected he was being watched or if the girl's safety became compromised, drastic measures might be needed immediately. Every second was filled with tension until, finally, the distant sound of police sirens grew louder. Relief swept over him as flashing red and blue lights reflected off the diner's windows, signaling that help had arrived. Mark's eyes followed the approaching officers, and as they stepped into the building, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. All attention turned toward the newcomers. Yet only Mark understood the gravity of the situation. The man's expression shifted. His face tensed, and his gaze hurried to the door as if he were preparing to flee. In a split second, he abruptly stood, snatched up his jacket, and began to move toward the exit. Mark's pulse pounded as he silently instructed himself not to let the man get away. Without wasting a moment, Mark rose and approached the table, his voice calm yet firm as he asked, "Are you leaving already?" His steady tone contrasted with the obvious tension that flickered in the man's eyes as he gave a brief, forced smile and replied, "We were just about to hit the road." His glance shifted nervously between the exit and Mark, weighing his options. In that critical moment, before the man could make a sudden move, 2 uniformed officers stepped into the diner. The shift in the room was immediate, and all eyes converged on the pair as the officers began to question the man. One officer, in a clear and authoritative tone, said, "Sir, we have some questions regarding this situation." The man froze and turned his head slowly toward them, his face an impassive mask that couldn't hide the rapid tension in his movements. The little girl remained silent beside him, her head bowed and her hands still gripped tightly by the man. The officer, soft but firm, then addressed her, "Can you tell me who this man is?" The child hesitated, her eyes darting fearfully to the man as if afraid to reveal the truth. Finally, her soft, trembling voice managed to say, I need help." Though barely audible, her cry was enough for both officers and for Mark, whose concern deepened instantly. The man's demeanor shattered into panic. His face turned pale as he clenched the girl's hand even tighter, as though preparing to drag her away. Before he could react further, an officer stepped forward and commanded, "Sir, release the girl immediately and step back." The man protested, in a strained, frantic tone, "Let her go right now." With an added firm reiteration, the officer's authority left no room for compromise. Reluctantly, the man let go, stepping back with evident unease as another officer gently placed a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder, promising safety. Despite her shaking, when she looked up, her eyes now showed relief, as if this was the moment she'd been longing for all along. Mark watched as the scene unfolded, a rush of relief mingling with the weight of the situation. An officer approached, him offering sincere thanks. "You did exactly the right thing by trusting your instincts. Without your help, we might never have ensured her safety." Mark simply nodded. He had acted out of necessity, not for accolades. The little girl looked at him with eyes full of gratitude, a silent thank you that said more than words ever could. With a gentle nod, Mark stepped away, allowing the officers to take charge as the man was escorted out in handcuffs, still insisting it was all just a big misunderstanding. The girl, though still trembling, now carried a spark of hope as the police gathered all the details, questioning the man further and assuring her that she was finally safe. After giving a full account of his observations to the investigating officers, Mark listened as the little girl explained in a shaky, soft voice that the man was not her father or a relative, but had kidnapped her from school not long ago. She revealed that her mother, who had long been estranged after custody was granted to her biological father, had conspired with the man to carry out the abduction. The truth unraveled slowly. The arrested man had no legal claim or custodial rights over the child. Further questioning exposed that the girl's biological father, a man overwhelmed with worry, had rushed to the scene upon learning of the kidnapping. When he finally spotted the girl, his face broke into a mix of fear, relief, and desperate hope. "Lila!" he called out, his voice cracking with emotion as the little girl's eyes lit up the moment she saw him. In a heartbeat, she leaped into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Her father knelt, enveloping her in a tight embrace as they both wept. No words were needed in that overwhelming reunion. Standing a short distance away, Mark felt a deep surge of peace. He knew he had done everything possible to return the child to a loving, protective home. Shortly afterward, one of the officers came over to thank him again. "Sir, you truly saved a life today," the officer said. Mark simply nodded, insisting that he had acted because it was simply the right thing to do. As he quietly left the diner, he continued to watch the unfolding scene. The man was taken away, and the little girl, now bathed in the comfort and security provided by the officers, slowly began to relax. Later, another officer approached him to gather more details of the events from the moment he entered the diner until the child signaled for help. Mark recounted every moment and every gut feeling about the unnerving behavior of the pair. Over the next several minutes, while the officers continued questioning, the girl slowly began to share how she had been abducted from school. She explained that the man was not a family member, but was involved in a planned kidnapping alongside her estranged mother's new partner, someone with a criminal history. The plan was to whisk her away out of state, even out of the country. Listening with a heavy heart, Mark realized the enormity of what could have happened if he hadn't intervened. His timely actions had prevented a tragedy that would have torn a family apart forever. Soon after, a police car arrived and out stepped a middle-aged man whose anxious face revealed the terror he had been through. This was the girl's biological father, who had been urgently notified and driven over as fast as he could. When his eyes met the sight of the little girl with an officer, tears streamed down his face. "Lila," he cried out, his voice a blend of heartache and relief. The moment she saw him, every ounce of fear seemed to melt away as she sprinted into his arms, sobbing with both sorrow and relief. The father knelt down, holding her close, sharing in her silent exchange of tears and love without uttering a single word. Mark stood back as the reunion unfolded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. An officer later thanked him again, remarking that without his decisive action, they might have lost her forever. The father, overcome with gratitude, approached Mark with trembling thanks. "I can't ever thank you enough," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "You saved my daughter." Mark placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and replied, "There's no need for thanks. I did what anyone would do in this situation." The father insisted, "Not everyone would have acted like you did. You trusted your gut when others might have ignored it, and that made all the difference." After some heartfelt words, the father even invited Mark to join their family at a gathering that coming weekend. Although surprised by the invitation, Mark accepted graciously, touched by the sincerity in the father's eyes. A few days later, Mark arrived at the family's home for the celebration. As he entered the backyard filled with warm chatter, the aroma of barbecue, and joyful laughter, he was welcomed by the father's broad smile and a genuine sense of family unity, a sharp contrast to the tension of the rest stop that day. Soon enough, the little girl, now called Lila, appeared holding a small ball, her face lighting up the moment she saw him. "Hey, Uncle Mark!" she exclaimed as she dashed toward him, filling his heart with joy at the sight of her cheerful smile. Kneeling down, Mark smiled and said, "You look so much happier now." Lila nodded enthusiastically, her eyes sparkling with renewed innocence and hope. Although he knew her road to healing from the trauma would be long, the love and support surrounding her promised a brighter future. Throughout the party, Mark began to feel less like an outsider and more like part of the family. The shared laughter, the warmth of familial bonds, and the clear relief that justice had been served left a lasting impression on him. As the evening drew to a close and the sun dipped behind the hills, the girl's father approached Mark once more with a drink in hand. "Mark, that day at the rest stop did more than save my daughter. It changed our lives. Lila and I will never forget what you did for us," he said with genuine emotion. Mark just smiled, taking a quiet sip before replying, "I didn't do it for... thanks, I did what was right." The father nodded, adding, "Sometimes doing what's right takes real courage, and not everyone has that. You stepped up when others might have looked away." The two exchanged a firm handshake, and the father went on to invite him to another family gathering, further cementing the new bond between them. As the celebration wound down and Mark prepared to leave, he said goodbye to Lila and her father, aware that the connection forged that day ran deeper than a simple act of heroism. That moment had been about creating a bond between strangers, founded on trust, courage, and doing what is right. While driving home later that night, with streetlights blinking along the empty road, Mark reflected on the events and the lives, forever impacted by a single brave decision. Though he had once faced countless battles as a Marine, this encounter reminded him that sometimes the greatest battles happen in the quiet moments of everyday life. Back at his modest home, under a sky full of twinkling stars, Mark felt an immense sense of peace wash over him, a peace he hadn't known in years. He realized he had not only helped reunite a family, but had also found a renewed purpose in taking action when it was needed most. Later, as he settled into his armchair and drifted off to sleep, he knew that his small act of courage had left an indelible mark on Lila's life and her family. In the weeks that followed, though he returned to his quiet routine, Mark continued to receive calls and friendly messages from Lila's father. Over time, they built a genuine friendship, and Mark found that Lila's family had come to feel like his own. Each time he saw Lila, a child whose smile was growing wider and whose laughter was now more frequent, he was reminded that even the smallest act of bravery can make a world of difference. Mark's life had changed for the better since that day at the rest stop. He had learned that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to act, that true courage is not about grand gestures on a battlefield, but about standing up for what is right, no matter the cost. Lila's story would remain with him forever, serving as a constant reminder that our actions, however small they may seem, can change lives. Thank you all for following this moving story. If you found it inspiring and want more stories like this, please subscribe so that you never miss a new tale. Let's keep spreading kindness and the strength of human decency to everyone we meet.